So I was walking my cat down an alley one day, and I ran into a bandit, and I was like, dude, you're a bandit, aren't you? And he's like, yeah, I am. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And so I started petting him. And he's like, dude, why are you petting me? And I was like, I have no idea why I'm petting you, but I feel like it. And he's like, oh, that's cool. I mean, as long as you have a legitimate reason for petting me. And then all of a sudden, this ginormous chicken came along, and I was like, dude, you're a ginormous chicken. And he was like, I'm a squirrel. And I was like, what the heck? No, you're not. And it turned out he wasn't a squirrel. He was just joking around with me. And so I was still walking my cat, and we have this awesome leash for him. It's like really big, and it like goes around him. And so yeah, and so it's kind of like a straitjacket, but it isn't. And so I was walking him and everything, and then I ran into this penguin, and I mean like we both ran into each other and knocked each other over. And I was like, dude, so sorry. So I gave him my insurance card, and he was like, thank you. And so he was gonna end up calling my insurance agency and everything, so that we could exchange information. And so I was going along, and then all of a sudden, you would never believe what I saw. I saw this door, and it was like talking to me. And I was like, what the heck? And then I noticed it was the door from my house. And it was the front door. And I was like, wait a minute, shouldn't that door be there? And so I went up and I was like, hi, sir. And he was like, I'm a missus. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. And it was like, okay, that's so weird. And so then I started talking to him. And I was like, dude, aren't you supposed to be back in my house? And I was like, well, actually, I got really bored there. There aren't any other doors for me to talk to. And I was like, oh, good point. And so I went off and I got in a friend door. And they ended up having babies, which is kind of awkward. Because, I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen baby doors, but they're really small. And, yeah, they grow fast. And so, and we didn't have enough stuff around for them to eat. And that got pretty annoying. And so eventually we had to put them up for adoption. And they sell like hotcakes. Not if you guys know what hotcakes are. They're cakes that are hot. It's kind of self-explanatory. But you see, I was eating a hotcake once, and I put syrup on it and everything, and I named it Raspberry because that's a pretty cool name. And I was like, yo, Raspberry, what's up? And it was like, you're about to eat me, so not a whole lot. And I was like, oh, well, that sucks for you. Until then I ate it, and then I could hear it in my stomach, and it was like, hey, dude, let me out of here. And I was like, no way, I'm not letting you out. And I was like, please. And then all of a sudden my stomach popped open, and here was Raspberry. And it was completely whole after I chopped it up and eaten it and everything. And I was like, dude, how'd you do that? He's like, I am very good that way. And I was like, okay, now, in that fake accent, I don't know what's up with that, but it's just really stupid. He's like, I know that, right? I didn't make it up. It is my real accent. That other one that I had was a fake accent. I was like, oh, so you're not actually American? He's like, well, no. And I was like, aha! So you are American. He was like, I guess I kind of am. I was like, I knew it. And he was like, how'd you know it? And I was like, well, I made you. And he's like, okay. And it thought it was kind of awkward, so it walked away from me. And I was like, don't you walk away from me, young lady. And he was like, I'm not a lady. And I'm like, whatever. And so I jumped on it and I ate it again. It was pretty good. And then I ran into a friend of mine. His name's Jose, but he goes by Todd. And so I was talking to him, and I was like, yo, Jose. He's like, dude, call me Todd. I was like, okay, Todd, that's cool. He's like, don't you know that my name's Jose? I'm like, yeah, Jose, I do. He's like, call me Todd. I'm like, okay. So we were walking together, and we were eating lunch. And I ran into Raspberry again. I'm like, dude, how'd you get out of me? He's like, well, duh, I'm in your imagination. And I'm like, oh, you're one of my fake friends. He's like, yes, because you don't have any. Oh, Bird. And Todd, I mean Joe or Jose or whatever you want to call my other friend was like, that was really funny. And he grew a pair of wings, and he flew up through the roof, and I was like, oh, that is so cool. And then all of a sudden, Batman came along. He's like, I am Batman. And I was like, yeah, I can kind of tell because you have the Batman cape on, and he's like, I know, I am Batman. I was like, that's cool. And then he turned into a fairy. I was like, dude, Batman, you just turned into a fairy. And he was like, I know, that happens very often. I have to make a call. And I was like, what the heck? He's like, I am also the Tooth Fairy. And I'm like, oh, I knew you were real. He's like, I know, right? Even though your parents told you that I wasn't real, I am. And I was like, so, who is Santa Claus? He's like, what do you mean? Santa Claus is Santa Claus. And I was like, oh, sorry, I thought he was another superhero. And he was like, oh, no, he's a polar bear. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. He's like, well, he's not any polar bear. He was that polar bear in that Chronicles of Narnia movie. Yeah, the one that pulled the witch's, like, little carriage thing. Yeah, pretty much. So this one day, I was walking down the park, and you would not believe what I saw. There was this squirrel, and I don't mean any kind of squirrel. I mean, it was a giant squirrel. And man, its teeth were huge. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was like, well, look, a beaver, and it came up to me, and it was like, no, I'm a squirrel. And I was like, oh, well, sorry. I didn't know that you were a squirrel. And it was like, well, can't you tell the difference between a squirrel and a beaver? And I'm like, well, actually, to tell you the truth, no. And it's like, well, yeah, well, guess what? My name is Earl. And I was like, oh, cool, isn't that a TV show? And it's like, oh, yeah, it is a TV show. Weird, they must have copied that from me. I'm like, no, I think you copied that from them. And they're like, I didn't, no, because my name isn't Earl. It's Chuck. And I was like, so, what's up, Chuck? And I started laughing. And it was like, that isn't funny. I've heard that so many times. And I was like, well, it is funny to me. And it's like, and so I just laughed. And so I got home, and my dog was like, dude, where were you? And I was like, I was talking to this perverted monk thing. And I was like, what the heck? And then my dog was like, wasn't that in the school newspaper? And I was like, yeah, I think so. And he was like, oh, well. And so the dog was like, so what actually were you doing? And I was like, well, see, there was a squirrel who I actually thought was a beaver and had huge teeth. And I came up and I was talking to it and everything. And he was like, dude, can't you tell that I'm not a beaver and I'm a squirrel? And everything like that. And I was like, well, no, actually, I can't. And so I took a sword and I chopped my dog's head off. And I was like, ow, that must have hurt. And the dog was like, yeah, it did. And I was like, dude, how'd you talk? That's really weird. And I was like, I have no idea actually how I'm talking because my head's chopped off. And I was like, oh, that's weird. So I glued his head back on and he was walking around like normal. But then it fell off again. And so I went to the vet and I was like, vet, what's wrong with him? And the vet's like, well, I think maybe his head's chopped off. And I was like, oh, maybe that would do it. And the vet was like, yeah, that tends to happen. If your dog ever loses your head again, try to use duct tape this time. And I was like, oh, that's a very good idea. And that actually might work. And the vet's like, I know, I've used it countless times. Well, not countless. I've used it actually 5 times, which is the same number of fingers on my right hand. Not my left hand, because I only have 3 on my left hand. But you see what I mean. I mean, I actually have 10, but I only have 8. Kind of. Yeah, like that. See? And so I was like, oh, that's weird. And the vet was like, oh my gosh, I just switched fingers all of a sudden. And I'm like, I know, that's weird, right? And all of a sudden that squirrel beaver thing came along again. And I was like, dude, what are you doing here? And the vet was like, well, you see, he's my friend. And I'm like, what? No way. And the vet's like, I'm also a dentist. And the squirrel's like, yeah, he does my teeth. And I'm like, what the heck? You're a dentist? And the vet was like, yeah, I'm also a dentist. And I was like, what the heck is a dentist? And he's like, well, it's half vet, half dentist. And I'm like, oh, so you like operate on animals' teeth? He's like, no, actually, I could open people. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. And so I was looking around and everything, and I saw these knives on the wall, and I was like, oh, that's a nice knife. And he was like, I know, right? And so he pulled it out, and he started writing with it. And I'm like, what the heck are you doing? And he's like, oh, this is actually a pen. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Off of like Pink Panther, except for it was a tape recorder, except for it wasn't. It was a pen. And he's like, yeah, I've seen that movie, haven't you? And I'm like, no, actually, I haven't. Just a friend told me about it. And then one day I was in a play and everything, but I actually wasn't. And then this one time I was, but I wasn't. And they came up and they were like, you're not, but you are. And I'm like, oh, okay, excuse me. And then my dog came along and its head was half duct taped on, and I was like, oh, well, that's kind of awkward. And my dog's like, yeah, I know, right? You know what happened? Somebody tried to chop off my head, right? And I was like, okay, that's cool. And he was like, well, yeah, but then they tried to glue it on, and then they took me to the vet. And I was like, oh, yeah, and so the vet told him to put duct tape on. And the dog was like, no, actually, I told him to put duct tape on. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And so then all of a sudden I became an alpaca farmer. And people were like, what the heck, why are you an alpaca farmer? And I was like, I don't really know why I'm an alpaca farmer. I just feel like it. And so then I became a Jedi, and I started flying around to weird little planets and everything, and then I became Superman. And, Superman really isn't that amazing because, everybody's like, dude, I want you to come over here and do my stuff and my laundry and everything. And I'm like, dude, I'm Superman. I'm not some maid or something. And they're like, oh, I beg to differ. You actually are a maid. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And so then I went back in time to the 70s and the 80s, more the 80s, and I started doing disco. But that was kind of awkward because, Superman doesn't go well with disco. And so I went back to Egyptian times and I became a pharaoh. And you would not believe what I found in my ear this one time. There's a ginormous spider in there. And, dude, its teeth were as big as that squirrel's. And then actually it turned into the squirrel. And I was like, dude, what are you doing to my ear? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And the squirrel was like, yeah, I like butterscotch. And so that's the end of my story. Enough.
Yeah, I know. What? Why are you still watching this?